Jesus' final warning. These three places are the only safe zones in the tribulation. What if I told you that Jesus and other prophets predicted the only safe locations you must be when tribulation begins? Jesus gave us clear warnings about the tribulation. You will be shocked when you find the only three safe zones in the tribulation. Could you already be living near one of them without even realizing it? Number 1. The Israel Wilderness, refuge of the woman. Picture this. The most powerful man on earth has just declared war on God's chosen people. Satellites track every movement. Facial recognition cameras scan every street corner. Digital currencies monitor every transaction. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, nowhere that's beyond the reach of a global surveillance state determined to hunt down and destroy except for one place. What could possibly exist that the Antichrist himself cannot reach? Hidden somewhere in the Middle East right now is a location that God himself has prepared as a supernatural refuge. A place where people will find protection during the darkest 3.5 years in human history. But how can a group survive in secret while the whole world is watching? A place where Satan himself will be powerless to follow. And this is just the first of many details that will build toward the full picture. And here's what's going to blow your mind. The Bible doesn't just tell us that this place exists. It gives us clues about where to find it. Let me take you to the Mount of Olives, just days before Jesus was crucified. Why did Jesus choose this exact moment, on the eve of his death, to give one of his most urgent survival commands? His disciples have just marveled at the magnificent stones of Herod's temple, and Jesus has shocked them by predicting that the entire structure will be destroyed. So they ask him the question that every believer since has wondered about: when will these things happen, and what will be the sign of your coming? And Jesus gives them an answer that contains one of the most urgent survival commands in all of Scripture. Why would the Son of God give a command so drastic that ignoring it could mean certain death? But here's what's remarkable. Out of all the instructions Jesus could have given his followers, it was about running. Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 and 16. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Did you catch that? Flee into the mountains. Not pray about it. Not wait and see what happens. Not trust that everything will work out. Flee, run, leave everything behind, and get out of there as fast as you can. When the signs appear, will you recognize them fast enough to act? Look at what he says in verse 21. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So the question becomes, if Jesus is telling people to flee to the mountains during the Great Tribulation, which mountains is he talking about? Where exactly are they supposed to go? And how will millions of people survive in a wilderness area for 3.5 years? Will God supernaturally provide for them as he did in the days of Moses? The answers to those questions are hidden in one of the most mysterious passages in the book of Revelation. And when you understand what this passage is really describing, you'll realize that we're not just talking about an ancient prophecy. Revelation chapter 12 begins with an image that has puzzled interpreters for centuries. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven. a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. A woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, 12 stars on her head. This isn't just poetic language. This is a cosmic drama that's about to unfold on the stage of human history. But before we can understand the wilderness refuge, we need to understand who this woman represents. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the clues are embedded right in the symbolism. The 12 tribes of Israel. So this woman represents Israel. But she's not just any representation of Israel. She's Israel in her glorified state, clothed with divine glory, positioned above the powers of this world. Verse 3, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." The dragon is identified for us in verse 9. "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world." So we have Israel, represented as a glorious woman, and Satan, represented as a monstrous dragon. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. The woman gives birth to a male child who is destined to rule all nations with a rod of iron. This child is clearly Jesus Christ, and Satan tries to destroy him from the moment he's born, which connects to Herod's massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem. But Satan fails. Verse 5, "And her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne." That's the ascension of Jesus Christ to heaven after his resurrection. Now, you might think the story ends there. Jesus ascended to heaven, so the drama is over. But that's where you'd be wrong, because the most important part of this vision is what happens next. Verse 6, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." Did you catch that? After Jesus ascends to heaven, the woman, Israel, flees into the wilderness. Not to a city, not to a fortress, not to an ally nation, to the wilderness. And she stays there for exactly 1,260 days. Now, here's where this gets really remarkable. "And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." Satan can't get to Jesus, so he goes after Israel with unprecedented fury. And verse 14 tells us what happens next. "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent." 2 wings of a great eagle. A place prepared by God. Supernatural transportation to a wilderness refuge. Protection from Satan himself. Provision for exactly 3.5 years. This isn't just symbolic language about spiritual protection. This is a literal description of the greatest rescue operation in history. God is going to physically evacuate his people to a specially prepared location in the wilderness, where he will supernaturally protect and provide for them during the most dangerous period in human history. But here's what's going to blow your mind. This wilderness refuge isn't some vague, indefinite location that God will figure out when the time comes. Verse 6 says, "It's a place prepared of God." That means it already exists. It's already been prepared. It's already waiting for its prophetic moment. So the question becomes, where is this place? What wilderness is God preparing? And how can we identify it from the clues given in Scripture? But before I reveal the three most likely locations for this supernatural refuge, you need to understand something that's going to shock you about the timing. The events described in Revelation 12 aren't thousands of years in the future. Based on the signs that Jesus gave us and the current situation in the Middle East, we could be looking at a timeline that's much closer than most people think. And that means this wilderness refuge might need to be activated sooner than anyone expects. Let me show you the criteria that this wilderness refuge must meet based on Scripture. First, it must be a wilderness area, not a city, not a fortress, not a modern facility. Revelation 12 specifically calls it the wilderness. This suggests a remote, uninhabited area that's far from major population centers. Second, it must be accessible from Judea. Jesus said, "Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains." This means the refuge must be close enough to reach quickly when the abomination of desolation occurs. Candidate location number 1. Petra, Jordan. Let me take you to one of the most spectacular and mysterious places on earth. Hidden in the rugged mountains of southern Jordan lies the ancient city of Petra, a place so remarkable that it seems designed by God Himself as the perfect refuge. Petra, which means rock in Greek, is literally carved out of rose-red sandstone cliffs. The entire city is hidden within a natural fortress of towering rock walls that create a virtually impregnable barrier against any attacking force. To reach Petra, you must pass through a narrow gorge called the Sakyu, a winding passage between towering cliffs that's only wide enough for a few people to walk side by side. This natural bottleneck means that even a small defending force could hold off an army of millions. It's the perfect military choke point. It's exactly the kind of place that would require total dependence on God. Could this ancient city, hidden in the mountains of Jordan, be the wilderness refuge that God has prepared for Israel's darkest hour? The evidence is compelling, but there are other possibilities that we need to consider. Candidate location number 2, the Negev Desert. Let me take you to Israel's southern wilderness, the Negev Desert. This vast expanse of rugged terrain covers more than half of Israel's land mass, yet it's home to less than 10% of the country's population. Most people see the Negev as worthless wasteland. But what if God sees it as the perfect hiding place? The Negev has several advantages as a potential wilderness refuge. First, it's already under Israeli control. This means that when the time comes to flee, there would be no need to cross international borders or navigate complex political situations. The Israeli military could facilitate the evacuation and provide protection during the transition. Second, the Negev is vast. It covers over 4,700 square miles of territory, more than enough space to accommodate millions of refugees if they're willing to live in primitive conditions. Third, the Negev has a biblical precedent as a place of refuge. This is where Abraham lived when he first came to the Promised Land. This is where Isaac and Jacob spent significant portions of their lives. This is where David hid from Saul in the caves and strongholds of the wilderness. The Bible is full of stories about God's people finding refuge in the southern wilderness of Israel. Could the Negev be God's prepared place for the final refuge? Candidate location number 3, the Transjordan highlands. The third possibility takes us back across the Jordan River to the mountainous regions of what are now Jordan and southern Syria. This area includes the ancient territories of Moab, Ammon, and parts of Edom, regions that are specifically mentioned in biblical prophecy as places of escape during the end times. The Transjordan highlands have several advantages as a wilderness refuge. They're mountainous and remote, providing natural protection and concealment. They have better water sources than the Negev desert, and they have a historical precedent. This is where the Jewish believers fled in 70 AD when they escaped to Petra. But perhaps most importantly, this region fits perfectly with Jesus' command to flee into the mountains. The Transjordan highlands are literally mountainous terrain that would provide the kind of rugged, defensible refuge that Jesus seems to be describing. The challenge with this location is that it's outside of Israeli control. The refugees would need to cross international borders and depend on the cooperation of foreign governments. In a time of global persecution against the Jewish people, that cooperation might not be available. So which location is correct? Here's what I think is going to shock you. It might not matter as much as you think, because the most important aspect of the wilderness refuge isn't where it's located. It's how people get there, and what happens once they arrive. And here's something that's going to give you chills. The timing of this evacuation will be so precise that it will demonstrate God's perfect knowledge of future events. The people who flee will have just enough time to escape before the net closes completely. Just like the Jewish believers who fled Jerusalem in 70 AD during the brief window when the Roman siege was lifted. Imagine dealing with medical emergencies, births, deaths, and everyday health needs without hospitals, pharmacies, or modern medical equipment. By every human calculation, it's impossible. Millions of people would die within weeks. The logistics alone would defeat the most advanced military organizations in the world. But Revelation 12, verse 14, contains a promise that changes everything. Where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. The Greek word for nourished is trepho, which means to feed, to fatten, to bring up, to nurture. It doesn't just mean survival, it means thriving. God isn't just going to keep His people alive in the wilderness, He's going to cause them to flourish there. Now, if this sounds impossible, let me remind you that God has done this before. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 4. Thy raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell, these 40 years. For 40 years, God demonstrated that He could sustain millions of people in the wilderness by supernatural means. And if He could do it for 40 years, He can certainly do it for 3.5 years. But here's what's really remarkable about the wilderness provision in Revelation. It's not just about physical sustenance. The purpose of this wilderness experience goes far beyond mere survival. Look carefully at the language in Revelation 12. The woman flees to her place, a location that God has specifically prepared for her. She's nourished there, cared for in every way, and she's protected from the face of the serpent, completely shielded from Satan's presence and influence. This isn't just a refugee camp. This is a spiritual greenhouse where God is going to do something extraordinary in the hearts and minds of His people. Think about what happens to people when they're stripped of all their normal dependencies and forced to rely completely on God for their daily survival. Their priorities change. Their faith deepens. Their relationship with God becomes intensely personal and practical. In the wilderness, you can't depend on your job to provide income. You can't depend on grocery stores to provide food. You can't depend on doctors to provide health care. You can't depend on technology to solve problems or provide entertainment. You have to depend completely on God for everything. And that dependence creates a level of intimacy with God that's impossible to achieve when you're surrounded by the distractions and dependencies of